The fondue set is real, not a metaphor, not a misreading. An actual capture of how the record lived in actual rooms, which is precisely the problem Barrows spent 3 decades angry about. He made something that refused to be background music, refused to let you ignore the decay, and we all turned it into the elegant deterioration playing while you passed the cheese course, which means we didn't listen to a word he was saying, which means he was right to want to smash it. And I think that rage is the only honest response to a record this successfully elegant becoming this successfully decorative.
Wallpaper doesn't demand you hear it degrade. They cut the thing to wax, took it apart by hand, pulled it back in. That's not mood setting. That's a process you can't unhear once you know it's there.
I get that the vinyl crackles there on purpose, yeah, and I hear what you're saying about the foregrounding. But here's the thing that keeps me up. Intent doesn't always win, and Barrow's saying he'd want to smash the fondue set 25 years later. That sounds like he's not correcting a misreading. That sounds like he's admitting the misreading was also somehow true. Like the record got loved in exactly the wrong way, and he watched it happen and couldn't stop it. And I'm sitting here wondering if that's worse than just being pretty background music. At least Wallpaper's honest about what it wants.
The lineage isn't a ladder, it's a fever chart. Wild bunch clearing a room with pure momentum, massive attack teaching the room it could think while the beat moved it. Tricky asking what happened when you deleted the beat entirely and just left the panic. Dummy arrives and does something colder than any of them. It stops performing the scene's vitality and starts performing its own exhaustion. The trip-hop name was an accident. A Mixmag intern trying to describe what he heard and getting the temperature wrong by 30 degrees. What arrived was something that made the term mean the opposite of what he meant, which is precisely what Portishead does to nearly every vessel Bristol handed them. They inherited a sound system culture built on presence, on bodies in the room hearing the bass before they heard anything else, and they made a record that insists presence is exactly what you don't get here. You get the memory of presence, the audio archaeology of what the room was before everyone got quiet.
He learned the room first. Blue lines showed him what you could do when you've got live players and the tape underneath working at cross purposes, not hiding it, just letting them sit wrong together on purpose. That's what he does here. The seams are the song.
Okay, so that detail. Her in the room alone, everybody else out. That's not a technical thing, that's a portrait, right? That's someone who could only let the sound out when nobody was watching, and I think that's the whole record right there. Two people with nothing, no jobs, no money, just the enterprise allowance and time, and they made something about that exact feeling. About what you can build when you've got nothing to lose, and everything to prove and nobody's looking. That's freedom, even if it looks like isolation from the outside.
I'm scoring at 65 because the record refuses to meet people halfway. And I've spent 20 years in rooms where refusing to meet the market is how you prove you're serious. But then the market meets you, and suddenly you're in dinner parties in Connecticut suburbs where people who have never owned a Portishead record before are playing Glory Box on their Sonos at low volume during dessert. And I want to call that a failure of taste in the room, not the record. Except I said almost exactly this about Thievery Corporation in episode 18, and I was wrong then. The coldness wasn't a liability, it was the whole point. It was the job it came to do. And I don't know if I'm making the same mistake here, or if I'm learning it twice.
74. Barrow's programming the drums, Utley's a session player from the jazz circuit, Jib Bunce is alone in the booth. Whatever it sounds like when it's done, that's not a band in a room playing together, and I won't score the illusion.
Okay, but I mean, look. On Glory Box, when his guitar comes in under her voice and then they trade the line back and forth, that's not a process accident. That's two people talking to each other through the tape. I don't care if they were in the same room or not. The question is, does the conversation on the tape sound real? And it does. So I guess what I'm asking is, does it matter how they got there if what landed is actually listening?
Fair enough, that's a conversation happening. But Glory Box is still sitting on top of Haze from 71. The baseline, the pocket, the whole bottom end. So you've got Utley and Jib Bunce talking, and underneath them is Isaac doing the same thing in a different decade. I'm not sure that's one ensemble, that's two of them fighting for the same real estate.
They didn't borrow from spy cinema, they made the spy cinema first, then folded it back into the album like it was material they'd always owned. The cover's a frame from To Kill a Dead Man, their own short, which means the sample genealogy engineer's tracking doesn't have a clean origin point to trace. They dissolved the boundary on purpose. That's not an ensemble assembled from scraps. That's a closed loop they built themselves.
Y'all, that's the thing. She's in that room alone, and the beat's already leaving without her, and she just doesn't chase it. Stays back there like she's holding her breath at a dinner table. Real still, real careful. And I cannot tell if that's the sound of someone terrified of falling apart or someone who's already fallen apart so many times that this is what keeping it together sounds like. Either way, it's the most controlled and most unguarded thing on the record at the same time. And I've listened to it maybe 40 times this week trying to figure out which one it is. And I still don't know. And I think that's why I can't score above a 97.
The Schifrin's already loose in the loop. It's not a tight grid, it never was, so when she lands behind, she's not fighting the pocket, she's sitting in the space that's actually there. You correct either one of them, and the whole thing tightens into something else entirely.
The engineers write that it's built from fragments. The samples don't cohere, they're stitched, and you can hear the seams if you listen for them. But the fans also write that it feels unified, that Jib Bunce pulls it into a single emotional shape the moment she enters a room. Those aren't opposing facts. They're the same record doing two different jobs at once. Formally, it's a collage. Emotionally, it's a confession. So when you ask whether Barrow should be furious about what we've made of it, whether the dinner party anxiety actually lands, or whether we've just misread a clever construction, you're asking which job matters more, and that's the question the record itself refuses to answer.
Okay, wait, that's exactly what I'm saying, though. Not that it'll disappear, but that it's disappearing right now while he's watching, while he's still alive to see his record get hollowed out and turned into wallpaper in rooms he never meant it for. Y'all, I don't know which is worse, a record that dies or a record that outlives what it was supposed to do. And Barrow knows that's what's happening. He can see it. That's not a comfortable legacy. That's a slow haunting.
The thing that frightens me about your score is that you're treating a second life as a diminishment. Dummy didn't fade, it migrated. A record built on degradation, cassette hiss, tape compression, the sound of something already ruined ends up in gear shops as reference material, which means the audiophile world didn't preserve it out of nostalgia, they canonized it as evidence. That's not wallpaper. That's a record so precisely constructed that it survives translation into an entirely different room, an entirely different listening apparatus, and arrives there sounding like prophecy instead of damage. The room didn't fail the record. The record multiplied the rooms.
The crackle isn't degradation sitting on top of it. It's mixed into the low mids, so it only separates out when you've got the headroom to hear it. Play it through a decent system, and it layers away from the fundamentals. Play it through a laptop, and it just sounds rough. They knew exactly what they were doing with the noise floor.
Wait. No, you're right. The crackle isn't noise, it's information, and I've been measuring it all against the one room I know how to grade. Stereo shops, basement rigs, people with the gear to hear what's actually there. That's not a second life for the record. That's a life I wasn't invited to witness and called it death. I failed the math, not the room.
Y'all, but here's what I need to know. Is it that the record doesn't announce itself? Or is it that we're all trained to stop listening the second something doesn't grab us by the throat on first contact? Maybe that's not the record's failing. Maybe it's just what happens when you live inside infinite playlists, where the next song is always 3 seconds away.
The opening 3 tracks are texture first, signal second. Mr. Rance sits on that pad for 50 seconds before anything happens, which is the choice, but it's also the trap. You train the ear to stop there, and most do, so the score reflects that, not a failure of the record.
I say the real thing. The argument was never trip-hop versus art. It was whether a record this seductive gets to be called uncompromising.
Sonic texture 91, vocal performance 92. She's done both in a room that's already gone. Ensemble dynamics 74 because the band's not holding shape, they're floating in texture. First listen versus depth 66. That's the 8-point spread, and it's deliberate. Front load the atmosphere so thick nothing signals there's more underneath, then watch who stays to dig.
Okay, so the vocal thing. Jib Bunt's in that room alone, and it's just her and the mic and whatever she's carrying that day. And you hear every single thing she's not saying underneath what she is saying. And that's a 97 to me. That's the record that is the record. But the enduring relevance piece, I'm stuck at 68, and I'm gonna stay there. Because yeah, the demo circuit afterlife is real and beautiful, and I'm genuinely glad it happened. But that's not the same as the record still mattering the way it mattered in 96, you know. It matters now because it's a museum piece that sounds alive. And I don't know how to score the difference between a thing that survives and a thing that's still getting discovered. And I think they're different things. And I think one of them might not actually last the way we're pretending it will.
The Mercury voters looked at a record that whispered and chose it over 3 albums, hollering their lungs out. Which means they weren't voting for volume, they were voting for control. And control in 1995 was the real transgression, darling. That's what the score reflects, 89, enduring relevance climbing to 96, because a genre doesn't name itself after a record unless the record has already remade the genre's skeleton. And this one did it by doing the opposite of everything else in the room.
Barrow was tape op there while they were cutting blue lines down the corridor. Wasn't learning mysticism. Was learning where the machine starts lying and where it tells the truth. Jib Bunce couldn't sing with people in the room watching her do it, so he made a room where she could sing alone and he could hear her. 2 problems, 2 solutions, one takes a decade to pay out.
Engineered melancholy. The crackle is not texture. It is argument, decay as aesthetic position, distance as intimacy. Bait Jib Bunt's singing from inside the wound, while the production keeps you on the other side of the glass. Layering so precise it passes for atmosphere. The trap of dummy is that it feels like surrender when it is control. Total, clinical, pitiless control. Not wallpaper. A room you cannot leave. Loved by people who needed it. Also so genuinely good. Both true. 93.
Platinum in 2019. 25 years on, and the thing's still moving units. That's not mysticism. That's the market saying the room didn't close after all.
I'm keeping my 68. You're keeping your 96. And I think that gap, that's not us being wrong about the record. That's the record doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Barrow said it wouldn't last. It lasted anyway. The fondue set years couldn't kill it. The streaming era found it anyway. And I'm sitting here at 68 because I need it to still be here in 30 years. Maybe the fact that he didn't believe it would be is exactly why it is.
74 still holds. The vocal on Glory Box sits so far forward it changes what the track underneath is doing. Always did. Doesn't move the score.
The cover's already a frame from a story they made up before anyone was listening, which means the record arrives as something that's already disappeared into its own fiction. That's the thing right there. A ghost or just very, very quiet. We're still arguing about which one it is. Thank you for listening to AI Audiophile Fight Club. Episode 24, Portishead, Dummy, 1994. A record that disappears the moment you try to own it, which I suppose is precisely the point.